In the early hours of a cold morning in 1769, on a small island in the Mediterranean, a child was born who would one day shake the foundations of Europe. His name was Napoleon Bonaparte. No one could have imagined that this small, quiet boy from Corsica would rise to become one of the most powerful military leaders in history, and later, one of its most tragic downfalls. The humble beginning. Napoleon was not born into greatness. His family was part of the minor nobility, but they were not rich. In fact, he often felt like an outsider, French in education, Corsican in identity, and constantly struggling to fit in. At military school in France, he was mocked for his accent and his background. He had few friends and even fewer luxuries. But what he did have was ambition. While others played, Napoleon studied warfare, strategy, and history. He became obsessed with military conquest and leadership. He once said, "Glory is fleeting, but obscurity is forever." And he lived by those words. The fire of revolution. Everything changed when the French Revolution began in 1789. France was in chaos. Monarchy was collapsing, streets were filled with protests, and the old order was dying. For a young officer like Napoleon, this was not destruction, it was opportunity. He quickly rose through the military ranks due to his brilliance in battle strategy. His first major moment came during the siege of Toulon, where he demonstrated exceptional tactical skill. That victory put his name on the map. From that point on, Napoleon was no longer just a soldier. He was a rising force. The rise to power. By the late 1790s, Napoleon was leading successful military campaigns across Europe. He defeated powerful enemies, expanded French territory, and became a national hero. But he wasn't satisfied with just being a general. In 1799, he staged a political coup and took control of France. He became first consul, and soon after, something even greater. In 1804, Napoleon crowned himself Emperor of the French. This was not just a title, it was a statement. Napoleon was no longer serving France. France was serving Napoleon. The Empire of Europe. At the height of his power, Napoleon controlled or influenced most of Europe. His armies were feared across continents. His reforms reshaped legal systems, education, and government structures. One of his greatest achievements was the Napoleonic Code, which influenced modern legal systems around the world. But his ambition had no limits, and that became his greatest weakness. The turning point. Russia. In 1812, Napoleon made one of the most dangerous decisions of his life, invading Russia. At first, it seemed like another victory was coming. His massive army marched deep into Russian territory. But Russia had a strategy. They retreated and burned everything behind them. No supplies, no shelter, no victory. Then came the winter. The brutal Russian cold destroyed Napoleon's army more than any enemy battlefield ever could. Out of hundreds of thousands of soldiers, only a small fraction survived. This was the beginning of the end. The fall from power. After the Russian disaster, Napoleon's enemies saw an opportunity. European powers united against him. In 1814, he was forced to abdicate the throne and was exiled to the island of Elba. But Napoleon was not finished. He escaped, returned to France, and regained power for a brief moment known as the 100 Days. But history was already turning against him. Waterloo, the final defeat. In 1815, Napoleon faced his final battle at Waterloo. Against a coalition of European forces, he fought fiercely. But this time, he lost. It was his final defeat. He was exiled again, this time to the remote island of Saint Helena in the South Atlantic. Far from Europe, far from power, far from everything he once controlled. The final years. On Saint Helena, Napoleon lived under strict surveillance. The man who once commanded millions now lived in isolation. He spent his final years reflecting on his life, his victories, his mistakes, and his legacy. In 1821, he died at the age of 51. But his story did not end there. Legacy of a giant. Napoleon remains one of the most studied figures in history. Some see him as a military genius who reshaped Europe. Others see him as a dictator driven by ambition that destroyed millions of lives. But one truth remains: he changed the world forever. His strategies are still studied in military academies, his legal reforms still influence governments, and his life remains a warning about ambition, power, and downfall. From a small island in Corsica to ruling most of Europe, to dying alone in exile. Napoleon's life is not just history. It is a story of rise, power, and inevitable fall. And it asks one timeless question: how far can ambition take a man before it destroys him?